Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to pull out those key insights from all the noise, giving you what you really need.
Exactly.
And today we're tackling something that's, well, it's cropping up more and more, isn't it? Especially if you're working in public service.
Absolutely. It's that crucial link between data stewardship and um, environmental responsibility.
Right. With everything being so data-driven now and AI booming,
Hmm.
generative AI especially.
Oh, definitely. That really puts the energy and resource use into sharp focus. We have to think about the footprint.
We do. So our goal today, our mission, if you like, is to explore how you, in your public service role, can use responsible data stewardship to, well, lessen that environmental impact.
And ultimately serve citizens better by building a more sustainable future.
Precisely. We've been digging into some interesting research on this. So let's start with the big picture.
Yep.
What are the actual environmental costs we're talking about with all this data?
Okay, well, the first big one is energy. Data centers globally. They chewed through about 460 terawatt hours back in 2022.
460 terawatt hours. How much is that in context?
It's roughly 2% of all global electricity use, which is already quite something.
Wow.
But here's the kicker. It's projected to basically double by 2027.
Bubble in just a few years.
Yeah, largely thanks to the demands of AI. And a huge chunk of that energy, sometimes up to 40%,
40%.
is just for cooling, just keeping the servers from overheating.
That's wild. 40% just for AC, essentially. But, okay, it's not just running the data centers, is it? The sources point further back.
No, exactly. You have to look at the whole life cycle. Think about the hardware, the satellites, the sensors, things many public agencies rely on, right? For environmental monitoring, for example.
Sure. Essential tools.
But making them requires rare earth materials, lithium, copper, cobalt. And mining these, that has serious environmental consequences.
Like what?
Habitat destruction, loss of biodiversity, huge water demands. We saw mentions of Chile, where mining can actually make droughts worse and spark conflict over water with local people.
Right. Water scarcity is a huge issue.
And then there's the waste. Toxic mining byproducts, tailings. They pose real risks for contaminating water sources.
So the very tools we might use to track environmental issues have their own impact. Satellites were mentioned specifically too, aren't they?
Yes, they're a great example. Launching them takes massive amounts of energy, obviously. Rockets aren't exactly eco-friendly, and then running them takes constant power. Plus, as they get better and collect more data, which is good in one way, it also ups the environmental ante.
Oh, so?
Well, the research suggests the total life cycle emissions of some satellite systems can rival those of smaller nations.
Really? That's staggering.
It is. And then you've got the end-of-life problem, space debris, another environmental headache.
Okay, so it's the hardware production, the energy to run things, the data centers amplifying it all. It's interconnected.
Exactly, which really underlines the need for more sustainable practices.
Which brings us nicely to data stewardship. How does that fit in as a potential solution? The sources framed it as a multi-pronged approach.
That's right. Fundamentally, data stewardship is about managing data responsibly, making sure it's used well, reused where possible, kept safe, and crucially, used sustainably.
Okay.
So when we apply that to these environmental concerns, a few key ideas pop out. First, optimizing data reuse.
Reusing data. How does that help the environment?
Well, think about it. Every time you reuse an existing data set effectively, you avoid having to collect new data.
Ah, I see. So you avoid the energy, the water, the materials, maybe even building new infrastructure needed for that new collection.
Precisely. The example given was reusing satellite imagery for environmental monitoring.
Instead of launching a new satellite.
Exactly. If the data already exists and is good enough for tracking deforestation or coastal erosion, why incur the environmental cost of a whole new mission? It's a very direct way for public bodies to cut their footprint while doing their job.
That makes a lot of practical sense for public servants. Then there was this idea of a circular economy for data, circular data.
Yeah, circular data. It's about setting things up so data collected for one reason can easily be shared and used for other public purposes.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Maybe weather data, initially gathered for daily forecasts,
Right.
could then be reused by researchers modeling long-term climate change impacts. You get more value from the same data without the extra environmental cost of collecting it twice.
So it's about maximizing value and minimizing redundant effort.
Exactly. But it relies on having good frameworks for data sharing and, importantly, interoperability.
Interoperability, meaning the different data sets can actually work together.
Precisely. Like, if different agencies track water quality, can their systems talk to each other? Can the data be combined easily? That's interoperability. It lets you build a bigger picture without starting from scratch.
So breaking down silos between departments or even different levels of government is key here.
Absolutely. And stewardship also tackles efficiency in how we manage data day to day. Yes. Things like using analytics that are fit for purpose. Not using a supercomputer for a simple calculation, basically.
Yeah.
Optimizing storage, getting rid of duplicates.
Right, the digital clutter.
Yeah, and choosing energy-efficient infrastructure where possible. Green computing. It all adds up to lower the environmental burden of these big data systems that public services depend on. Compact data formats, efficient code. It all plays a part.
So it's about being smarter across the board, collection, processing, storage. And the research linked this directly to broader environmental goals, too.
It did. Because principles like reuse, transparency, accessibility, these are core to good stewardship, and they enable better environmental decisions in the public sector.
How?
Well, if you have better shared data, you can craft much more effective sustainability policies, right? You can track resource conservation better, measure carbon footprints more accurately. Good data fuels good environmental governance.
You mentioned digital waste earlier.
Right.
The stuff we just forget about.
Yes. We don't often think of old files as waste, but poorly managed data, unused data sets, duplicates sitting on servers, they still take up storage space.
Which consumes energy.
Exactly. Good stewardship means you identify valuable data, document it, make it accessible, and reuse it. You actively prune the digital clutter that just drains energy unnecessarily.
This all sounds vital, but, how do we make this real for public servants on the ground? The sources talked about operationalizing this.
Yeah, that's the crucial next step. The research strongly suggests developing practical guidelines, clear, actionable advice for public servants on how to weave sustainability into their everyday data work.
Things like how to reuse data effectively, how to cut digital waste, choosing greener options.
Right, and importantly, these guidelines need to be tailored. The data challenges in, say, public health are different from transportation or environment agencies.
That makes sense. It's not one size fits all. And it sounds like the people managing the data stewards need more recognition.
Definitely. The research really emphasizes positioning them as strategic players, not just techies, but people who understand both data value and sustainability.
So embedding them in leadership,
Yeah.
giving them the tools and authority.
Yes, and fostering a culture across the organization where sustainability and data practices is genuinely valued. It needs to come from the top, but be practiced by everyone.
And what about that circular data idea? How do we encourage more of that?
The research points to policymakers needing to actively promote and incentivize it within the public sector.
Incentives like?
Maybe grants for projects that share data effectively, public recognition or certifications for agencies doing it well, maybe even creating clearer frameworks that just make sharing easier and safer, removing barriers.
So make it appealing and straightforward for agencies to embrace circular data. And how do we know if any of this is actually working? Metrics came up.
Absolute key. We need to integrate sustainability metrics right into data governance frameworks in the public sector.
Tracking things like energy use, emissions.
Exactly. Energy consumed by data operations, the carbon footprint of data processing, maybe even resource use linked to hardware life cycles. Having those metrics helps you see what's working, where improvements are needed.
And helps align data practices with those bigger environmental targets that public services are often working towards anyway.
Precisely. It makes the connection explicit.
It really feels like this needs a joined-up approach, though. Not just within government. The sources mention collaboration.
Hugely important. These challenges, data center energy, AI's impact, hardware life cycles, they're too big for just the public sector or just the private sector to solve alone.
So public, private, civil society working together.
Yes. Sharing best practices, aligning on sustainability goals, maybe pooling resources to tackle those really big shared challenges, like making data centers greener overall, or figuring out the true lifecycle impact of AI used in public services.
This has been really insightful. It makes it so clear that responsible data stewardship isn't just some technical back-end issue.
Not at all. It's fundamentally about environmental responsibility. And that's especially true, I think, when you're working for the public good.
Yeah. And with data demands just going up and up,
Exponentially.
building sustainability into how public organizations handle data isn't really optional anymore, is it? It seems essential if we want to minimize the harm while still getting the benefits of data for citizens.
It's becoming a necessity. You have to manage the footprint.
So maybe the final thought for you, listening as a public servant, is this. How could you look at your daily work with data through this environmental lens? Even small changes. How you store things, whether you check if data already exists before collecting anew, how you share information. What could those small steps, done collectively, mean for the resources we all depend on and for the citizens you serve?
It's a powerful question because data stewardship really does offer a practical way forward.
A way for the public sector to actively contribute to sustainability.
Exactly. Better outcomes for citizens, smaller impact on the planet. That's the goal, isn't it?
It is indeed. Hopefully, this deep dive has given you some valuable things to think about and perhaps encourages a more sustainable approach to data in your own crucial work.